we'll begin with a roll call. Take it away, Heather.
Helen Jenkins. Helen Jenkins is absent. Andy Medford. Andy Medford is absent. Neva Hassanen. Neva Hassanen is absent. Michael Houlihan.
Here.
Michael Houlihan is here. Dudley Imprada.
Here.
Dudley Imprada is here. Jason Rice.
Here.
Jason Rice is here. Jamie Hoffman.
Here.
Jamie Hoffman is here. Stephanie Potts.
Here.
Stephanie Potts is here. Vince Caristo.
Here.
Vince Caristo is here. Peter Benson.
Here.
Peter Benson is here. John Newman.
Here.
John Newman is here. And with 8 regular members and 2 alternates present, we do have a quorum. And Chair, would you like to appoint Vince Caristo and Peter Benson as voting members tonight?
Yes, I would.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, move on to agenda item number 3, approval of the minutes from the February 6, 2018 meeting. I personally didn't see any changes, but anybody have any comments about the minutes? Okay, seeing none, we'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Do we have a second? Second by Michael, motion by Jason. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, the minutes from the February 6th meeting are approved. Do you have any public comment on items not on tonight's agenda? So, of course, we have some folks in the crowd for specific items that are on the agenda, but if there are any general comments that anyone wishes to make at this point, now would be the time. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 5, that's staff comments. Do you have any staff comments? Nothing in particular? Okay. On to item number 6, which is public hearings, and item A is a rezone of 210 West Beckwith from R5.4 to RT 2.7. That's a city rezoning, and it's presented tonight by Jenny Baker. Take it away, Jenny.
Thanks. Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jenny Baker. I'm with the City's Development Services Office, and tonight we are going to talk about a rezone request from Torrin Eder and Caden Bardsley of EBC Development to rezone 210 West Beckwith from R5.4 residential zoning, which permits single dwellings, to RT 2.7 residential, which permits 2-unit or townhouse dwellings. This rezoning will result in a standard zoning district under Title 20, which cannot be conditioned. This is the location of the property. It's on Beckwith, and it's at the edge of the Slant Street neighborhood, just south of 6th. It is part of City Council Ward 3 and the Rose Park Neighborhood Council. You can see it's a bit of a strangely shaped parcel. This is a closer look at that parcel. It is 13,564 square feet. Currently has 1 single dwelling on it and a garage. The parcel would permit, under the current zoning, 2 units, and under the requested zoning, it would permit up to 4 units. The area surrounding the property has a mix of single and duplex residential building types, though all the parcels immediately adjacent to this property are single dwelling residences. The applicable regional plan is the Our Missoula City Growth Policy 2035, which recommends a land use designation in this area of residential high density. So that recommends a density of greater than 24 dwelling units per acre. Zoning districts that most closely align with that density recommendation are RM 1-45, RM 1-35, RM 1.5, and RM 0.5. All of those are multi-dwelling residential zoning districts. The applicants are requesting RT 2.7 residential, and that allows 16 dwelling units per acre. This is greater than the R5.4 zoning, which allows 8, but it is significantly below that recommended by the growth policy. Areas designated as residential high are close to the core of the community, where city services and infrastructure already exist. The growth policy emphasizes a focus inward approach to developing locations, and part of that is that there should be existing infrastructure, streets, sidewalks, proximity to services, and you can see on the map on the right that there are 3 bus routes right around where this property is. It's the star. And then here, this green line is actually the Bitterroot Trail, so it's also close to bicycle facilities. It is a central location close to the core. You can see that there are parks nearby and there are also schools. This is the current zoning map. You can see that there is just this, the small triangle here, which is the R5.4. This is the parcel. So beside it and contiguous to the north is RT 2.7. That's what the applicants are requesting. And then surrounding it is actually an area that recommends even higher development density of RM 145, which is one of the multi-zoning districts, or the multi-dwelling zoning districts. Those would permit up to 43 dwelling units per acre. We took a look at historical zoning, and this map is a little bit difficult to see. This was part of the original town site in 1932 when zoning was applied. At that time, it was a B residential district. So all of this in sort of brown that you see was classified as B residential, and that district permits multifamily or multi-dwelling developments. It would be equivalent to today's RM 1-45, as you saw in the previous slide. This area was zoned as B, or the equivalent as the zoning designations changed, from 1932 until 1972. And at that time, that small triangle that you saw here was zoned R 5.4. So although the immediate area has been built out with single dwellings, this is an area that has always been designated in the city as one intended for denser and possibly even multi-dwelling residential development. This slide compares the current with the requested zoning. Some of the differences include the fact that R 5.4 only permits single detached dwellings. RT 2.7 permits those, but it also allows 2-unit or townhouses, so essentially duplexes. The minimum parcel area is a little bit different, as is the area per unit. Setbacks are similar, with a little bit of a difference on side setbacks. It's 7.5 or 1/3 the height in R 5.4. It's 5 feet on the side for RT 2.7. Heights are the same, and as we've been discussing, how many units per acre is one of the more significant differences. 5.4 permits 8, RT 2.7, 16. Here are some pictures. This is if you are standing on Beckwith. This is the existing dwelling. I believe it's vacant. The garage is back here. It's a little bit difficult to see. The shape of the parcel, as you saw, is a little bit unusual. This is if you are standing in the alley looking to the east. This is the garage for the house. And then this is sort of if you're standing beside it, and so here you're looking at the back of the house and the garage. So this area is currently all vacant and would be used as part of the development. In considering the review criteria, we look at whether a rezoning request is in accordance with the growth policy, whether it has adequate public services and transportation, if it promotes compatible urban growth, if it promotes public health and safety, and if it is in keeping with the district character and suitability of uses. This rezone does comply with the growth policy recommendation. It is in an area that has existing public services and transportation. It promotes compatible urban growth because it better implements the growth policy, which encourages greater density in areas close to the urban core. It proposes development that is compatible with the existing urban pattern in the area. It is residential, as all of the surrounding uses are. It accords with the promotion of public health and safety by being in an area with existing public services, including police, fire, emergency services. There's access to water and sewer, plus proximity to schools, parks, the trail system, and other public amenities. The rezoning gives reasonable consideration to the character of the district and the suitability of uses that are the same or similar to the uses on surrounding parcels. As a result, our recommendation is approval of an adoption Approval of the adoption of an ordinance to rezone 210 West Beckwith Avenue from R5.4 residential single dwelling to RT 2.7 residential 2-unit or townhouse. That is all I have to tell you. If you have questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Jenny. Would the applicant wish to speak on behalf of this project at this time?
I don't think so. I think she summed it up pretty well.
Let's get to that after.
Well, to answer questions if you have any questions for us.
Okay. All right, thanks. Any public comment on this item? Come on up and state your name for the record, and if it's a name you think requires spelling, please do so.
You can help me clarify that. Susan Caldwell?
Sure, and there should be a microphone. It kind of I think that's it right there. It sort of looks like a mouse to your left. And if you,
I'm at 441 Rollins, which is directly across the alley from this property. The alley, I believe, to be 8 to 10 feet wide. And we have quite a bit of traffic in the alley that does not let two cars pass each other currently. So one of my issues, currently we have traffic issues, and to go ahead and put 4 units there, and it was my understanding that the access to traffic is going to be off that alley. And I believe that the applicants were thinking it's a 20-foot wide alley, but I do not believe it's more than an 8 or 10-foot alley if two cars can't pass each other. So my concern is, one, traffic, where the cars are going to park, and we have daycares. It's kind of mixed use. So we have daycares, kitty corner on either side of this property. So anybody that lives near a daycare or has raised children knows that it's a little frantic early and late in the day with traffic. And so if you have people coming and going with 4 new residences in that alley, there's going to be issues because two cars can't pass each other. And it's confusing because this is also where the slant streets meet McCormick, if you will. So we're kind of in that little nebulous zone of east-west, north-south, Lolo Peak to Hellgate Canyon versus north-south. So it's not square and it's not traditional. So I don't believe that we looked at, I haven't heard the traffic being addressed, nor have I believe we have a clay pipe in the alley too, sewer-wise. So please talk to the sewer folks before approval of 4 residences, because as it is now, twice a year, the sewer lines get blown out and we're an alley house and it literally blows water out of our toilet. So I'm not sure the infrastructure is quite ready for 4 new units either. Thank you.
thank you. Further public comment? If you just come forward and again state your name.
My name's Wayne Cruz. I live at 504 Cleveland, which is a corner house on the corner of Cleveland and West Beckwith. So our house is directly across from 210 West Beckwith. And I know that, there's demand for places like this. But there's also demand for, single residential houses. I mean, my wife and I, we have a couple of rentals. One of them is right next door to us at 510 Cleveland. And when we put that on Craigslist, within 3 hours, there was like 10 people wanting to fill out applications. By the time we got it off of Craigslist the next day, we had like 15. Plus there was like a half a dozen people just stopped by to see what the property was like and didn't even bother to fill out an application. And our other rental, it's in the lower Rattlesnake, our current renters, they were thrilled to get out of their duplex so they could have a house with a yard they could put a garden in, have a clothesline, have a place for their dog to run around. And I think with a development like this, none of that is going to be possible. And that's kind of what the character of this area is. Sure, there's other areas that want to get filled in with more dense area, more dense housing. But there's also a demand for areas not to have dense housing. And this is one of those areas. I mean, Jim and Joanne across the, or they share the property that's right next to this unit. You know, and they have a garden and a clothesline. And they got this wonderful apricot tree that would supply half of Cleveland Street with apricots for a year. You know, Elaine and I, we have our garden and our clothesline, and we've got an apple tree and a plum tree. People down the street on Cleveland, you know, they have their gardens, they have their clotheslines. They have, yeah, Dana, a couple houses down, she has an apricot tree that would supply the other half of Cleveland with apricots for a year. Across the Cleveland Street from them, Ben, his wife, and two little boys, they have the chickens. You know, I mean, that's what this area is like. I mean, when you start infilling, all of that disappears. You know, I mean, you put 4 houses in a resident or in a lot like this. I mean, the only way they're going to be able to have a clothesline is if they attach it to the house next door. I mean, right now from the map that you showed of how everything is zoned, this area is like an island within that. And that's something I don't think we should lose. I mean, there's a demand for single-family houses. So anyway, thanks.
Thank you. Further public comment? Yes, sir.
My name is Shelley Francisco, and I'm here on behalf of my father, who was hospitalized this morning, and my mother, Joanne Francisco. And Wayne just mentioned that they have the house at 212 West Beckwith. They have lived in that house since 1968. Most people in this neighborhood have been there for decades. And my question is, why such an extreme zoning request? It's absolutely unnecessary to take this area from a residential area. Yes, it's an odd-shaped little space. It has enough, I guess, what you would call acreage to fit 2 really nice houses, as Wayne mentioned, and that is in demand. It's in strong demand. These builders are not going to lose any money, and this should not be a monetary project. But in order to keep the integrity of this neighborhood, this doesn't make any sense to me. Again, there is a demand, a strong demand in this town for nice houses with big yards, and that would fit very nicely there. You did not see the picture of my parents' house, which is very similar to the one that Jenny Baker put up on the screen. It's going to absolutely destroy their home. And when you put your life savings into a house, are you paying attention?
Yeah.
When you put your life savings and I know I talked to Gwen Jones and she's like, oh, these are not emotional projects, you know, and look at Grove Street. Well, I did look at Grove Street and that zoning and the grievances that those people spent months and petitions attempting to have someone listen to them. There is a huge difference in this zoning request based on that zoning, and there were concessions made. And what I'd like to know is, one, why such a huge spectrum of zoning requests from R5.4 to townhouses, and what kind of concessions are we looking at here as far as space? Gwen said, put up a fence, as if this has already been zoned. And I don't really appreciate comments like that. So what exactly is going to be done to make this remain a lovely residential neighborhood that is quiet, keeps its integrity, and doesn't destroy what these people have put their life savings into.
Thank you. Further comment? Yes, sir. If you would, just state your name for the record. Sure. Thank you.
My name is Peter Bring. I live at 821 Hickory Street. This development is right next to my house. I bought my house 11 years ago. It was a 100-year-old house built in 1896. I was trying to find the aerial photo of my house. It was the preacher's house for the church that was on the same block, which is now a Montessori school. The photo shows my house, the preacher's house, and the church, and nothing else anywhere around it, except for some really great trees. They're still there. I bought this house, I remodeled it, I put everything I had into it, and the yard that this development is speaking about has been a home to deer and all sorts of kids running through, and it's just a great neighborhood spot. And I love the neighborhood I'm in. I'm very concerned about this development. I think it would totally change the traffic, the feel, the aesthetics of the neighborhood, and I'm opposed to it. As much as I appreciate development is necessary in this town, I don't feel like this is the place for it. And it's not just out of a selfish point of view. That neighborhood is very special to Missoula. There's some great trees that have been there for over 100 years, and those will probably come down if this happens. I'm not just a tree hugger, but anyway, just wanted to express my opinion. I hope you'll make the right decision.
Thank you. Further comment?
Hello, my name is Jerome Gannon. I live at 541 Rollins Street, and I'm not really necessarily against the development. What I am concerned about, though, is the traffic. The traffic on Rollins Street tends to be there tends to be a high volume of traffic, and it's actually pretty fast. People go quite fast, and there's many kids. We have 3 kids. There's several other kids on our block. And we have actually talked with Ben Weiss at the city about trying to get a traffic calming device installed on Crosby and Rollins, and that is actually in the works. We're just looking at it. And my primary concern is the possibility of increased traffic due to this. And I was wondering if there would be a possibility that perhaps as part of the rezoning that there could be a traffic calming device installed just to counteract the possibility of increased traffic due to the higher density. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Further public comment?
Would it be all right if we just address some of the concerns?
Yeah, come on up. And I think that's, trying to think about the order here, whether we want to close the public hearing and then we can talk about that. You know what? Why don't you go ahead and make the comments that you're going to make, and then we'll close the public hearing after that. If you would sit down at the microphone so we have it on the record.
My name is Torin Eder, as Jenny mentioned. So just to address a couple of the comments that were brought up here, I guess first of all, traffic along the alley, it does seem narrow because there's a lot of, I think cars are parked in the alley, et cetera, but it is a 20-foot alley. We've had it, we had our property surveyed and had it checked. It's just similar to other alleys around town, probably being encroached upon by other cars or landscaping, et cetera, in the alley, but it is a full 20-foot alley. The sewer main in the alley is a modern sewer main that we would be able to tap into. So the concern about sewers wouldn't be a problem. We talked to engineering already, and they say that there's capacity in that sewer. And as far as the size of the lot goes, at 13,500 square feet, we would be averaging about 3,400 square foot lots if the new zoning was approved. That's similar to some of the other houses around there. The neighboring house at, I think it's 212 West Beckwith, is a 3,900 square foot lot. So the density that we're talking about is not, it's not extremely dense. And I think while this zoning would allow for townhomes also, for duplexes also, our company does not build duplexes, and I know the zoning can't be conditioned, but we would definitely propose single-family detached residences. Just for the neighbors. I know that somebody else could potentially build duplexes on the property, but we wouldn't. And so that's why we think it's actually would be keeping in character with the neighborhood, because we would propose single-family detached residences, not duplexes, not an apartment building, I guess, which would be allowed under the RM 145. And also, as Jenny mentioned, that's part of the reason that we chose to request the RT 2.7 over the RM 145, which most of the Rose Park is that we feel that's a more appropriate density for that area. And so, again, what we're proposing would be single-family detached homes, and the lots would be smaller. They wouldn't have gigantic yards, but we find that a lot of our past clients don't want gigantic yards. They do want a detached home. They do, their privacy of their own house, but a lot of people we found just don't want a giant yard, but they do want the character of that single-family detached house. As far as traffic goes, I'm sure there will be more traffic, slightly more traffic, but as far as places that can handle that traffic, well, people shouldn't be speeding down that alley, and I know neighbors are concerned about that. There's a lot of cross-cutting through the alley, people cutting from Hickory to 6. As far as traffic generated by new houses there, we're close. We're 2 blocks from Orange Street. We're 1 block from 6th Street. So to us, it seems like an appropriate place that a slightly larger volume of traffic could be handled. And then I guess lastly, we think it's a great spot too, just like the neighbors do. We're both native Montanans and been in Missoula for a long time, and the kind of projects that we do tend to add value to the neighborhood, not detract. And we strongly believe that new people coming to Missoula should have the opportunity to live in great spots like this too. So that's what we'd like to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment on this item? Yes, ma'am. Come forward and state your name, please.
My name is Elaine Conder, and I live with Wayne at 504 Cleveland. And I just want to ask that you guys really research this a little bit. I've walked that alley many, many times. I don't quite understand how it can be 20 feet wide when I over and over again have had to pull over into the driveway of another person that lives on the corner there, I forget their names, in order for somebody to pass. And yes, some of that problem may be because there's cars in these other residents that are parking out in the alley, but how is that going to change? Has anybody done any research on that? And this is an alley that makes a sharp bend. So it's not like any other alley I'm aware of in Missoula as far as people come around that corner and don't realize there's somebody right up on them. And the other thing is I walk that alley all the time, and that can get dicey because there's not sidewalks to walk on as you walk from Beckwith over to 6th Street. So I would just ask that, I don't know who's doing the research on this, but just to clarify what you're hearing from two different sources that contradict, because I do feel like it's going to be an issue, especially if you've got 8 cars, and it sounds like you guys are going to have them pulling in, so people are going to be backing out of into the alley. 8 cars backing out into the alley right where there's a sharp bend, and people are coming around the corner. So this is something that, no matter what you do, in my opinion, needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment at this time? One second, we'll get you up here, Jenny, in just a minute. I'm sure the board's going to have questions. Is there any additional public comment at this time?
I just want to make one clarification real quick.
Yes, ma'am.
So Susan Caldwell, living at 441 Rollins. Hickory is a 20-foot long street. And Hickory, it goes abruptly, as Elaine was saying, at that corner from the 20-foot street of Hickory to an 8 to 10-foot alley. So I just want to make sure we're on the same page. There is a change from a street to an alley. And currently it's not marked, and it does take, I'm not really, my geometry is a little off right now, but is it a 45-degree angle? Yeah. At least. So this is, let's just make sure for the record, this is where the slant streets meet. I believe it's called the McCormick Addition. So it is unique, not just the shape of the lot, but the traffic too, just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Gotcha.
I appreciate it.
Thanks. Sir.
Just one more comment.
What was your name again for the record?
Peter Bring, 821 Hickory Street. I believe there's an easement along my property that runs right through this property. There was originally going to be an alley between Hickory and the alley that is behind Beckwith. I looked into buying this property a long time ago, and I know that there was a potential easement for an alley right along my property line, which is right along this property line. I guess the city is going to release this easement that they have in order to allow for this change. I'm just wondering, that easement was put in there originally for a reason, because the city realized that it's going to grow and it's going to need traffic moving through there. What the last person just said about this alley narrowing down is true. There's no way it's 20 feet. It's like maybe 10 feet across. There's no way 2 cars can go at the same time where Beckwith turns into where Hickory turns into Beckwith.
Okay. Are your comments complete, sir?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other public comments? We'll address this in questioning with the board, but what I don't want to happen is for there to be a back and forth here while the public hearing is still open. Thanks. Do we have any additional public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, and we're going to open this up to comments from board members, and I have a feeling that questions, I know my personal questions hopefully will flesh out the answer to what's happening here. I might just start, since we just ended on the right-of-way discussion, but my sense, my guess is that the paved width of the Hickory extension / alley, or whatever it's classified as by the city, is not 20 feet, but that the right-of-way is 20 feet. Is that correct? Jenny, is that correct?
Jenny Baker with Development Services. You are correct that the width of the right-of-way is 20 feet. The paving at the current time is maybe 10 to 12. Alley improvements will be required at building permit, but as you all know, that's not something that this rezone can really address.
That's right, and that's a comment that I sort of wanted to make at the outset, which is sort of always confusing and hard to stick with, I think, sometimes with rezoning requests. But the idea with the rezoning is, just for everyone's sort of information here, and what we're supposed to be thinking about and what the city council is supposed to be thinking about with respect to this request when it gets to them, is not the particular project that is at this moment in time spurring this rezoning request, but whether or not this particular property is appropriate to be zoned to this zoning district in perpetuity. Obviously, we're seeing that zoning is not necessarily in perpetuity because somebody's asking to change it here tonight. But the idea is this zoning district appropriate for this property for time in memoriam here, regardless of what these gentlemen are thinking about doing. And it's not an appropriate consideration to say, because they're talking about doing a few houses, detached houses, that the zoning is appropriate. Those two things aren't supposed to be linked according to state law and according to the way the Montana Supreme Court interpret state law. So while we have some inkling of what they're going to be doing, our consideration generally is going to be a little more like, regardless of the project, is this an appropriate property to be zoned this zoning district? So as a little bit of sort of context, I guess, for our deliberations. But anyway, additional questions, comments from the board? Dudley.
Jenny, I thought I saw an email that we were going to get some hard copies of some comments that.
We have received 5 comments about this proposal, and I believe that you should have received 3 of them. 2 of them I received today, and so I did print them, and I will send them around to you.
Thank you.
And one other quick thing I wanted to say, Jerome, your question regarding the traffic calming device and whether that could be installed or required as a condition to this particular rezoning request, because the applicant is proposing to go from R5.4 to RT 2.7, which are both standard zoning districts under the Title 20 zoning code, they can't be conditioned. So we either have to recommend approval or denial of this rezoning without any change to it. We're not allowed to modify the RT 2.7 as it applies to this property, and adding a condition would basically modify it. So the answer to your question is no, we can't condition it.
This is Jenny Baker again. Both of those comments are from people that you heard from this evening.
Thank you. Vince.
Jenny, I have a question. Is there anything in the site plan review that would look at the trees on the property? One of the people said there's 100-year-old trees on the property. Is that anything that's regulated through that process?
With single building permits, as it sounds like would come in here, there isn't anything that Parks has input on. It would be up to the developers whether they can or choose to maintain the trees on the lot.
I'll ask a quick question, Jenny. You covered this, but I just, if you could repeat for me the progression of how this went from, the comment was made before that this is kind of an island of R5.4, and the same thing jumped out at me, that this is like a reverse spot almost. It's sort of an odd little piece of zoning in the middle of a sea of other zoning districts, it seems like. How did we get from B to R5.4 when you said that RM1-45 was probably more akin to B?
We could find the history of the zoning, but not the reason for it. So when the rezoning request came in 1972, they asked for R5.4, or the equivalent at the time, which I think would have been I don't actually know the county or the designation, but it was equivalent to what you see now. There aren't records from 1972 as to why. It just was their request and it was approved at the time.
Okay. Do you know what the density permitted under B was? I mean, that's going back a ways, but.
It would have been equivalent to the RM1-45, so it could have been up to 43 dwelling units per acre.
Okay. Additional questions, comments from the board?
I'll just make a comment that this is an odd spot, as far as the access goes. But it is interesting that it's almost encompassed by access points. And that alley, I would kind of tend to agree, is going to get a little bit of extra traffic because of the way Hickory ends there. And I would hope, even though we can't condition it, that city engineering would consider some options, like maybe turning it into a one-way or do not, road in. I see that in some other portions of town where they've got these weird spots that they put kind of like a do not enter kind of thing, because they're going to get additional traffic from people who get to the end of Hickory and like, oh crap, well, I'm just going to go down this alley. It'd be nice to kind of have them at least consider that, but I know it's not really part of the zoning. So I can see how it would get additional traffic compared to another alley potentially. So.
Stephanie.
Yeah, so I have a comment and then a question. Just to sort of second what Jason said, that I'm familiar with this area. I work in this neighborhood, and I am familiar with this alley, and that it's not functionally 20 feet. And so I do hope I understand that it's not part of this particular request, but I do think that that is something that needs to be dealt with at some point in time, especially as this neighborhood gets denser and there's more parking in that alley. It's something really important to think about. My question is, I noticed in our packet of comments from city officials and folks from the fire department, they recommended something about having more fire hydrants installed in the area. So I'm guessing that's also something that can't be conditioned on this particular zoning request, but also just something I wanted to know that was in there from the fire department, a concern about that from Dax Frazier. That's on page 7 of the packet that we got.
Additional comments or questions? Jamie.
Jenny, is it not true that the zoning regulations require, even for single-family detached housing development, that if you have an alley, you must use it for access, for parking access? So that regulations wouldn't allow access off of even Beckwith?
The access will come from the alley, and as part of that with development, there are improvements that will be required to the alley. So, yes, and with development on the lot, the parking has to be contained on the lot. It can't be on the alley or in the street. The parking has to be on the lot with the dwellings that are developed.
And one more question. With regard to the fire hydrant, the recommended motion does not include that. Is that correct?
Because this can't be conditioned, it's not something that's addressed here. It's something that we've been talking about with fire in anticipation of building permits, and we are working with them to figure out which is the closest hydrant, whether a new installation is needed, but that will come up at the building permit review.
Is it not true that a hydrant has to be as close as 5, or the maximum distance to a hydrant to the development is 500 feet? Jason, do you?
Well, yeah, but it's not, we can't consider that as part of the zoning. So when they go through their building permit process, then they'll have to look at that.
Okay.
And that routinely happens. We have several projects that have been hit with fire hydrants this year because they're not close enough. They're looking at it very closely.
And that regulation is controlled by the fire code, isn't that not true?
Yep.
So if you don't meet the fire code, the fire department can require such things.
That is true. The closest hydrant in this instance is 350 feet.
It's got to be close enough.
Can I ask you a clarification, would you mind? So currently there is no alley access off this particular lot. If it were to not get changed in zoning and stay the 5.4, would Beckwith still be an option? So regardless of how this gets changed, the neighborhood is being changed from no alley access on this property to alley access on the property. Is that correct? Okay, just one.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing I was going to point out is looking at the aerial photo, the alley was currently developed with garages much closer than current zoning and building codes allow. You know, they're going to have some pretty significant setbacks to get the garages to fit in there. Because they have to have a back out space, and so the new ones will actually function better than the existing ones from what I can see.
If this aerial helps, you can see where the garage is, and I believe that the access does come from the alley back here. Oops.
Yeah, that's right. I can see it on my phone here. It's got kind of a dirt that sort of comes off to the left as you're heading north.
But it's a wider spot there too, if you see that, versus the narrower part of the alley.
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to, we're apples and apples and oranges and oranges, but it's the narrower part of the alley that isn't currently being accessed by cars backing out of the property.
Additional comments or questions from board members? Vince.
Yeah. So I understand that the proposed rezoning would potentially lead to a significant change for the property, in particular for the adjacent property owners, two of which, or all of which came out tonight. But in the bigger picture of the neighborhood, I don't agree with the comment that this was an extreme zoning request. I actually think it's quite reasonable. I think it's reasonable next step in development for the neighborhood. I live a few blocks away to the north, and one of the things that I like about the neighborhood is the diversity of housing types. There are apartment complexes, there are duplexes. I live in a property with 4 units surrounded by large single-family homes. There are accessory dwelling units, and I think that sort of diversity is important and valuable. I'd just like to put that out there because I think it's important.
I agree with all of your comments, Vince, and I think especially in this day and age when we're seeing, again, not with particular regard to the project that's being talked about here tonight, but just the provision of smaller lots and the prospect that some smaller single-family homes that maybe come in at less than $250,000 for families that are trying to get into the market and people that, I shouldn't say families, but anybody who's trying to purchase a home. I think, it's important to have lots that facilitate the construction of homes that come into that range. So, Peter, I interrupted you there.
Let's see if I turned it on or not. I'm not sure if this is the venue, but what do we ever think about open space in the area, in the larger area around a particular property that's being questioned? Is that part of the purview of what we consider?
I mean, Jenny, that might be a better question for you to ask, but I mean, in terms of, generally speaking, the only time that open space is like specifically set aside would be like in the subdivision context when maybe you're, going to build out a piece of property that at a denser, at a higher density than it was before, or it's a green field and you're going to develop it. I don't know if there's much in the way of review. That might be at building permit. I don't really know.
So in this instance, because you're dealing with fewer than 3 units being developed at a time, there isn't a requirement for open space aside from the setbacks that are required for each single parcel development.
Thanks.
Well, I mean, we, like 4A, whether it's zoning is designed to promote public health, public safety, whether the zoning is designed to secure safety from, I'm trying to find it actually. Oh, there it is. Consider reasonable provisions for adequate light and air, and then I think there's another one. I mean, the zoning code, that is something we have to consider, is transportation, all of the provisions of an urban infrastructure, that's another one of them. So, they've made findings of fact as a staff on behalf of the city, and if we agree or disagree, we can review those and say, no, we don't agree with that, and we can send that message along to city council. And that's the other comment, we're just an advisory board to the city council, and so if we can find problems and agree with parts of this, we can send our notes along to city council and then they can consider that in their final deliberations.
So I'd like to make that comment too, John, is that we're supposed to consider this, whether this zoning is appropriate and whether it fits into the growth plan. And a lot of work went into, and although it'd be nice and it always comes up, you'd like to know what the developer's going to do, but we're supposed to consider whether the zoning is appropriate. I'd find it somewhat relieving that they're talking about single-family dwellings and not, multiple family dwellings. But again, we're not supposed to consider that. But whether the zoning fits and is appropriate.
Additional comments or questions, Stephanie?
I'd just like to say, I do think that something to be considered down the road is that impact on traffic, but there's also something about diversity to be considered and also about building affordable housing in town. I live in a similar neighborhood in an area where we have a mix of new, smaller units going in, and I live in a yard with a garden and a clothesline, and I actually have really found that to help invigorate the neighborhood and help make it so that more people in my community can afford to live in it without having to purchase outside of town in areas where we're destroying open space, where we're eating up farmland and other areas like that. So recognizing that Missoula is going to grow, the appropriate place to seem to do that seems to be in these urban cores where you're in walking distance to a supermarket, where you're in walking distance to schools, where you can get on the bike trail easily, and hopefully help to alleviate again some of those congestion issues and the more lifestyle things too. So.
Any other comments or questions on this item? Yeah, Vince.
Jenny, are site plans ever reviewed by the planning board or another public body other than subdivisions?
Not in the instance of a rezoning?
At the next stage.
When you say the next stage, what do you mean?
Well, do they need to get a site plan approval in order to get a building permit?
Yes.
Okay, so is that approval ever done before a public body?
It has not been for single parcel residential development, not to my knowledge.
Okay.
I think under the circumstance where someone was proposing a PUD, we probably would see it.
Right. Okay.
But other than that context, I'm not totally sure that we would.
So as a standard zoning district, it would be reviewed for compliance with zoning, engineering, and building code. But that is an internal process to the Development Services Department.
Right. I mean, the reason I ask is because this is just another great example of a single rezoning where the really legitimate issues relating to the site design have been brought up. And it's just not clear that those issues are ever going to have a public forum to be worked out. So it seems like these particular rezonings that have happened in the near past particularly have, they seem to have a greater need for public input. So.
It's kind of one of those situations where, I mean, the public input on things like this happens at the time where, like, engineering revises its code. You know what I mean? Which is not satisfying, but it's probably impractical to allow public opinion or public input on every building permit that comes down the pike. I mean, I think about getting the public record bulletin every week, and there's 100 building permits a week, and it just wouldn't work. So I think we have to trust that the regulations and the codes that are enforced by the various departments are serving our best interests. But it's sort of a leap of faith, unless you're there when it's being rewritten, and you're able to provide input at that point. But
right. I mean, and we trust, that like the building, when the site plan's reviewed, that they understand there's a child care facility right next, nearby, things that are, very hyper localized that sort of come out in forums like this. And I'm sure our city building department does a good job with that stuff, but you're right, it does come down to the codes and the laws and trusting that they serve the public well.
One thing I'd like to add is we have been working with engineering on this, and we intend to do a sidewalk in the alley, and although you guys can't consider that, we are concerned with this layout, and we do intend to do things to make it work better than it works now.
Would you state your name for the record, sir?
Caden Bardsley, Gordon's
thanks.
partner.
I was just doing kind of a quick comparison of setbacks and lot sizes, and I forgot that there was an RT 2.7 and an RM 2.7. If they're not really wanting to do townhouses, I guess the question is why wouldn't RM 2.7 suit their needs just as well? And I guess that's the question for them, is why they chose one over the other. For you, Jenny, whether you know.
There is no difference in the density that would be permitted because of the size of the parcel between RM 2.7 and RT 2.7. The difference is the building type. With RM, it could be a multifamily. It could be a 4-unit apartment complex. That's not what they wanted to request, and so they've gone with RT to reflect the fact that they wanted to not build an apartment building, I guess.
So RM would allow an apartment building?
It would. The density is the same, the minimum parcel area is the same, it's just the building type that would be different between that.
And I hadn't read it all the way, so you're saying RM actually could be more intense than the RT then?
It's the same number of units, but the building type would be different.
Additional comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, entertain a motion if anyone cares to make it. Mr. Hoffman.
I move, how do I do this? I move that we approve the recommended motion as provided by staff. Do I need to read that right now?
I think under the circumstances, it would be just for purposes of getting the legal description in there. So page 3 has got it up top.
I'm sorry.
Page 3 of the staff report has it.
Page 2, page 3, not 2?
I guess you could do that one. It's the same thing.
Yeah, I think.
I will bring it up for you.
Thank you, Jenny.
Same thing.
So I move that we approve the request to rezone fractions of lots 7 through 10 and the south half of lots 11 and 12 of Block 16 in South Missoula Addition from R5.4 residential single dwelling to RT 2.7 residential 2-unit/townhome based on the findings of fact in the staff report.
A motion from Jamie. Do we have a second? Seconded by Vince. I think we'll do a voice vote here and see what happens. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, seeing none, the motion passes. Thanks everybody for your comments. We appreciate it. Okay, item number 7, communications and special presentations. We have a county land use map update from Mr. Andrew Hagemeyer. You need a second to bring up a presentation, Andrew?
Yeah, give me half a second. Let people clear out.
Yeah. Whenever you're ready, sir.
All right,
Take it
I'm
away.
ready. Yeah. My name's Andrew Hagemeyer. I'm a planner with Missoula County Community and Planning Services. I'd like to thank the chair and the planning board for having me in tonight and give you a little update on a project we're working on. Some of you are new to the board, and so might have to give a little bit more of a background because it's been a while since I've come in and updated you on the project. The project is the Missoula Area Mapping Project. It's also kind of known as the Land Use Strategy. It's a multi-phase project we're undertaking to update the land use map in the Missoula County Growth Policy. So this zoning conversation we were just having, or you were just having, I had no part of, a lot of those decisions about what type of zoning is appropriate are based off of that land use map in the city's growth policy. The Missoula County Growth Policy was originally adopted in 1975. There have been updates piecemealed through neighborhood plans throughout the county over time. When the county adopted the growth policy in 2016, there was not an update to the land use map. I think I was not here, but I think that was a logistical choice. It was outside the capacity of the consultant that was, or the funding capacity of the county to pay for the consultant to do it. And it was also recognized that Missoula County is extremely diverse in terms of our planning issues, and that maybe trying to update the land use map all in one shot wasn't the best strategy. So it was pulled out. It was identified as a priority implementation step following the adoption of the growth policy. I happened to show up shortly after the growth policy was adopted, and they put me on the project. So yeah, I came in here to give you a little update in August. There's been some delays in the project. We were supposed to be at this point last fall, but here we are today. I'll give you an overview of my presentation. I'm going to go over the land use strategy to kind of give you a primer for those of you who aren't really aware of what it is. I'm going to talk about this document I just handed out. This is the planning area profile. I'll kind of give you a run through of that. I'm going to summarize what we're about to do in our outreach round 1, public outreach round 1, and then we'll take some questions. Try to keep it pretty short. I'll try to keep it. You guys can have all the questions you want. So the land use strategy, as I mentioned, it's a key implementation action of the growth policy. The growth policy had guidance for how the county should go about updating the land use map, and it really called for breaking the county down into geographic areas and focus on geographic areas that A, had a lot of growth pressures, and B, had support of planning. Not all areas in Missoula County are really psyched about planning, so we want success, and so we're breaking it down. And we're focusing on the Missoula urban area first, and I think it's obvious. 8 out of every 10 new residents in Missoula County land within the city limits or just on the edge. 8 out of 10. The county population of the city of Missoula, of the urban area of Missoula, is larger than the city of Kalispell. It's a significant population. The combination between the city and this urban area around the city in the county is 86% of, I believe it's in here, 86% of the county's population. The problems, the issues that we see in this area are very sophisticated. We're talking about very high, urban densities. We're talking about water and sewer extensions. We're talking about annexation. These are not relative issues in Frenchtown, in Potomac. So it really made sense to focus in on this urban area first. So this is kind of the big picture process that we're doing for phase 1. I should mention that we are going to get to the rest. We are going to go out and work on the rest of the county once we're done with this process. We don't know what that's going to look like. We're going to reevaluate when we're through this part. We created this draft planning area profile. It's what we've been working on for the last 8 or 9 months. We are now entering a public outreach phase that should really kick off later this week and early next week. Hopefully you'll see some stuff in the newspapers. We'll have websites, et cetera. I'll get into that a little bit more later. Once we are done with the outreach, phase 1, we'll actually draft a land use map. Then we'll take it back to the public and get comment. We'll revise the map, and then we'll take it in, starting with you, planning board, for the adoption process. You will hold a public hearing on this according to the state statutes, as this is an amendment to the growth policy. So look forward to that. The planning area profile itself. So when I first showed up about a little over a year and a half, well, last December, and they stuck me on this project, I started to look at what we had in terms of documents and planning documents and background and research and stuff like that from Missoula County. And I noticed that we were sort of missing a piece, is that we didn't really have anything that spelled out what's driving the change in our urban landscape. And since we're looking at a land use map that is trying to paint a picture of what our community is going to look like 20 years from now, I felt like it was important to have an idea of what's driving change on our urban landscape, what trends we're seeing in development, what trends we expect to see in development. So we actually, instead of just starting with having a conversation about what the map should look like, we took a step back. So we started with drafting an existing conditions type document. And that's what this planning area profile is. It documents some existing conditions, recognizes existing conditions, and then it really discusses the drivers of change that we're going to see in the Missoula urban area on our landscape, on our urban landscape. As our community grows, we're seeing roughly 2,000 people move into Missoula County every year right now. As people move into Missoula County, we're going to see a greater need for employment centers, for industrial land, for commercial land. We're going to see, as we know, a greater demand for housing. So these are the three things, the industrial land use, commercial land use, and residential land use, that are going to drive change in our urban environment, our built environment. And what I mean by that is, the old car lot might turn into a mixed-use center. The green field might turn into a subdivision. Those are the changes that we might see in our community. So we look at those drivers of change and we talk about trends that are happening nationally that might be representative here in different types of land use. And then we look at the key considerations out of those trends, the things that we need to think about when we're developing that map, developing what we want this map to look like for the next 20 years. So chapter 1 is real simple. It sort of sets the stage for what we're trying to do here. The most important item in chapter 1 is just a statement that this planning area profile is just one tool that we're going to use to update the land use map. We just recognized that there was a piece missing in our, we had a growth policy, the city has a growth policy, we have area plans, we have studies on industrial land, we have housing studies, we have ag reports, but we didn't really have anything that said what's going to be driving change of the human environment. Chapter 1 walks through the guidance and the growth policy on how to update the land use strategy, how to update the land use map. It discusses how we came to the project boundaries. And it basically describes how the planning area profile is going to be used. Chapter 2 is called Where Are We Now? It's the existing conditions portion of the document. Now, I just mentioned all these reports and plans that we have out there, so this document was not intended to be a 100-page profile detailing out demographics. The city has already put together a wonderful 120-page profile detailing out the city's demographics. It's not meant to duplicate, the existing conditions aren't meant to duplicate these other reports. What it does focus on is the people and the place. So it does focus on demographics, and it does focus on identifying some of the shared values we have in the community that are mappable. It doesn't dive into detail. It's just recognizing that these things are here and that there are resources out there to find additional information. Chapter 2 is titled How Much Will We Grow? This is population projections. We're fortunate, I don't know if it was by design or by accident, but the city and county both used the exact same population projection in our growth policies. So we're on the same page there, which is great. The population projection we used is developed by the Montana Department of Commerce, and it's projecting that Missoula County's population by 2040, which is roughly 20 years out from, obviously it's 22 years out, but by the time this is adopted, it'll be roughly 20 years out, will be about 140,000 people. That's roughly, it's about 30,000 people more than we have today. I think it's a little conservative. It does recognize that we have an aging population, so our population growth might slow down in the course of the next 2 decades. This chapter identifies that in our planning area, which is the area between the city limits and the boundary of our planning area that we've identified, which is, see if I can find it real quick. Well, It's in this document. I'm not going to waste your time looking for it. So the planning area, we project is going to grow by about 14,000 people over the next 20 years. It's important to recognize that a significant portion, based off of past planning practices between the city and the county, will be annexed into the city. So it's greenfields right now, it's empty land right now, it's in the county. It will be annexed into the city, the development will occur in the city, but that's something that we as a county still need to be aware of. We need to work with the city on planning for this area. How I identified that, I used census tracts, and I looked at between 2000 and 2010, the census tracts in the planning area, and looked at the share of growth that the planning area had. About 45% of growth occurs within this area. So I used that number, projected it forward with the population projection. It's a little techie. Chapter 4 is what I really call the meat of the document. It's how will we grow? And it's really focused on two things. There's trends, and then there's these key considerations. Starting with the trends, what we did was we went through all these publications that are reputable planning documents and real estate documents, and we looked at the way development is changing in our cities throughout the country. And we worked with our technical committee. We asked them, are these changes present here in Missoula? Are these things, these trends happening here in Missoula? And so we clung on to the ones that they felt that were present here. So, for example, industrial lands. We're not expected to see a lot of smokestack industries in the Missoula area anymore. This is the old days of the big polluters with the big tall pipes pumping out stuff in the air. That's probably not happening here anymore in the future. Industrial uses are focusing much more on wholesale and distribution and warehousing. Industrial uses are increasingly having commercial components to the land use or to their operation. So you might have a manufacturer and they might have a storefront as well. Also, we're seeing an increase in manufacturing. Montana is outpacing the rest of the country in manufacturing growth. Very small manufacturers, we're talking 1 to 5 employees or 0 to 5 employees. And these manufacturers might be much more compatible in residential areas and what we call live-make environments. For commercial, the power centers of the past, power centers are things like Reserve Street with all the box stores. Nationally, they're on the decline. People aren't building those really anymore. What they are building are things called lifestyle centers. Think about the development, the Fox Theater development that's proposed. Think about the old Champion Mill site over in Park. Slipping my mind the name of that development there.
Old Sawmill,
the old Sawmill district.
Right?
Yeah, that is a classic, perfect example of a lifestyle center. It's a mixed use. It has residential, it has commercial uses, tied to amenities. We're also seeing increased mixed use nodes. The area around Draftworks is a perfect example where you're seeing a little bit of mixed use integrated in neighborhoods. For residential, people are still making trade-offs. These are the trends we're seeing. People are still willing to buy a little bit more house out in the suburbs, but they're also other people are willing to buy a little less house to be closer to downtown. One trend that we're worried about in Missoula, but we don't have actual evidence to support that it's happening, that's really clear cut, but that we might be in what's called an inelastic market in our housing. Inelastic markets are markets that are constrained in some way. Constraints come in two fashions. They come in physical constraints and they come in regulatory constraints. So what happens with the constrained market is they can't build enough houses fast enough, essentially. But the more technical thing is as demand increases or supply decreases in the marketplace, that drives housing prices up. In an elastic marketplace, as the demand recedes or the supply increases, and in an elastic marketplace, that price would correct It would come back towards its original price. In an inelastic marketplace, as those things happen, the price just stays up, never corrects. So you essentially just get incremental up and never really down or steady. We clearly have a lot of geography that can present constraints here. Whether or not our regulations are constraints, I think that's up for debate, but the housing study that just came out indicated that maybe some of them were or are. There's also a lot of discussion in the document about, or in trends in renting versus owning. Some people want to rent, some people want to own, how that affects housing. And there's also this trend of people wanting age in place. And what that means is they want to stay in the same community. They don't want to, there needs to be a variety of housing choices to let people, as they go through different stages of their life, find different types of housing. So what that means for our land use map. For industrial, infrastructure is super important in industrial areas. The county is probably going to be the primary driver of industrial land use in the future. Less and less industrial land is being located in the city. So how the county needs to go approaching that probably is, first of all, expanding upon our existing industrial areas that we have, because we have quite a few. Next choice would be to find new industrial areas that are near or in proximity to infrastructure because of the levels of infrastructure that are required. And also identifying places where we can have small-scale manufacturing integrated into our neighborhoods in this live-make type environment. For commercial, again, we need infrastructure for big commercial development, especially access to water and sewer and roads, people. Because of that, we're guessing that a lot of the big commercial projects are probably going to go towards the city. They'll probably be annexed into the city, so we need to plan for that. But we probably need to plan for some smaller nodes in our existing neighborhoods. Residential, we don't want, as we talk about the inelastic market, we don't want our map to become a constraint. If we don't designate enough residential land, then the map could actually prevent new residential from coming online, and being a policy constraint, causing an inelastic marketplace. We want to provide for a range of type and densities of housing. So the reason is we want to allow the market to evolve. It's amazing, housing actually preferences in housing changes pretty quick. If we didn't identify housing preferences today and plan for that for 20 years out, they won't be the same in 20 years. So we need to allow the market to kind of fluctuate and adjust. Our land use map needs to plan for that. And lastly, we need to plan for infrastructure. We might need to identify areas and get infrastructure out ahead of that development. Chapter 5. Chapter 5, one thing that this process isn't really trying to do is this isn't a policy document. This isn't intended to be adopted by the county commissioners. It is informational for this process. We are going to take it out to the public, we're going to get feedback on it, and then we're going to revise it, and then we're going to use it. We're not trying to adopt new policy in this. We have a growth policy that's brand new. We have a city growth policy that's brand new. We have area plans in most of the planning area that provide land use direction. We're going to look to those existing land use policies that are out there. So we recognize that in this document by having a chapter dedicated to those adopted land use plans. There's area plans, which are neighborhood plans, and there's also issue plans, which are like our transportation planning documents. So I literally finished this document at about 5 o'clock today, put the final touches on it, so there are probably some things in it that are still a little raw. It is a draft document, and it will remain a draft document until we're done with the public outreach, which we're starting in earnest really by the end of the week. We've hired a communications consultant to help us really get the word out about this process. What we're trying to do in outreach round 1 is we want to inform the public of the project, because this, even though I've been working on this for a year, no one knows about it. We haven't gone out and really gotten a lot of public interaction on it yet. So we want to inform the public of the project. We want to get feedback on the profile. I especially am hoping we get feedback on those key considerations. We want to see what people in Missoula that really know the place think about what's happening out on the ground. And we also want to engage people on what their values are. This document is a little void of values, and that's design. We want to have the conversation values out in a more public arena. Our outcome is that the public is more informed of this outreach process from now on, that the profile is revised, and that we have these values and information for when we actually go out and start drawing the land use map. Outreach round one, as I mentioned, we have a consultant that's helping us with communications. We're going to hold 5 public workshops, one in East Missoula, one in Bonner. We've been working with those communities for a while, discussing their vision. They don't have area plans, so we've been out in the community a little bit ahead of this process, trying to get an idea of what they want their community to look like in the future. There will also be a workshop in Target Range and another one in Hellgate Elementary, right? No. Yes. And then we'll have one downtown that's being held during the day. We're going to have an online participation tool. This is a really neat mapping tool. It's called Social Pinpoint. It'll ask people to rank their values, to tell us what values are most important to them, and it'll allow them to identify where those values are present on a map. Hopefully that will give us some real good patterns on where things are that people value in the community, and so we can help develop the map to kind of reflect those values. We're also going to have a bunch of stakeholder meetings with community groups that we've identified, a wide range of groups. And we're going to be doing hopefully we'll get some earned media. We're going to do a press release, hopefully get some earned media out of that. We have a website that we'll be launching soon, and the consultant who's really, really good at social media and using that as a tool to get the word out about things, they will be starting that process this week. Here's the dates and times and locations of the workshops. Mr. Chairman, I would love to send this to the board, the dates and times, if that's possible.
That sounds great.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I really encourage you all as individuals to try to find a time to come and participate. That would be really, really cool. Thanks.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm almost done. So next steps, after outreach round one, we're going to take that input and we're going to start working on a map. Hopefully that map will be done into May. Then we'll start outreach round two. In a lot of ways, outreach round two is going to mimic outreach round one. We might make tweaks to make it function better, but very similar process. And that will happen probably in June. We'll make revisions shortly thereafter and start the adoption process in late summer, early fall, and that will start with you. All right, a lot. It's been a while since I've been here, but thank you, and I'm here to answer questions.
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah.
Questions, anybody?
Not a question, but a suggestion. If they want to get people to show up, just put rezoning notices in every neighborhood and they'll all show up.
The community council in East Missoula is doing that without, I just got an email before I came here. I was like, you gotta be kidding me, guys.
And subdivision.
Yeah.
Subdivision on like every other block and rezoning on every other block.
There you go.
And you'll get everybody to show up.
Nice. Nothing quite like misrepresentation to bring people out in droves, right?
Well, they don't. I would say that one of the critiques I've had is that we seem to get a really, really good cohesive group of people that come out and comment on the growth policies, and I find that they kind of tend to be maybe a pretty vocal participant minority. We have 140,000 people and maybe 10,000 participate, if that, and so that's max. Well, between all the different things they do, even the Missoula one, it all seemed like a success, but in reality is we see what people really think when they come in and their neighborhoods are under attack, and so they think. And so I think once you get more people engaged, which is very, very difficult. So I mean, I'm halfway joking, but halfway serious. I mean, not until your neighborhood is really at some sort of mercy, do you really get interested in this stuff? And so that's just a reality check. You know, we all thought that things went smooth on some of the other ones, and I don't think it really went as far out as we think it did. Just that the people who showed up all agreed.
That's kind of an interesting concept. Instead of putting something like this is not, you know, like a disclaimer that, you know, don't worry, this isn't any regulatory step yet. Maybe let people guess and think that something bigger is on the line right now.
I don't know.
Kind of show up and find out. Are we going to rezone your property? I don't know. You have to come and talk.
Someday we might with this document.
Well, it's hard to get them to know what it is going to, you know, just like
what it means.
the zoning tonight. If it's in the growth policy, did many of those people participate? Probably not, but it's going to affect them. You know, it can affect them.
No. But I totally agree that the affordable housing issue is about availability of lands for, you know, what we need. And right now that's, you know, it's super risky endeavor without opening things up and making it more predictable. So we won't see an affordable correction unless there's some other weird thing without opening up more lands and making it more predictable. So
He said, there's no money in affordable housing.
well, not affordable, attainable.
Vince.
I would echo Jason's comments to some degree. If this, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, if this is a process that is leading to rezoning, I think it's important for people to understand the context of what they're being asked to provide comments on. Is that true? It is likely leading to rezoning for many areas?
Yeah. In fact, right, this project started out as a map, just simply a map update. We are considering that it actually be morph into more than just a map update and actually adoption of an element of the growth policy, a land use element of the growth policy that includes recommended implementation steps. And that was because our technical committee has repeatedly told us that we can't just adopt a land use map and then walk away. We have to do some proactive zoning. So, yeah, I think we'll be upfront with the public when we go out and talk to them about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, even I don't have the firmest grasp of the process, so. Yeah, it'd be good to try and be clear because it's complex. There's many steps, and so I think a lot of people tend to get caught off guard with city process and feel like they find out about things too late, and so just being upfront.
Yeah,
at the very beginning.
You're right though. This map will be a major legal justification for zoning. Yeah, and there's areas that are unzoned as well out in the county that we're looking at.
Well, I think that's just being upfront, you know, and saying, hey, these stories that you've heard about, you know, Grove Street or whatever it is, this is the step that happens before you hear about it. So if you want to have a say, show up and say something. Because I think that people don't really, and maybe that's, I mean, I think that a lot of people don't think they really want to be heard. They kind of go through this process. And so, I mean, we do. I think I want to hear from other people and what they really want, because I think a lot of people want more of what, I don't know how to say it, but you know, I just don't think that people are always as well represented in the community as we think they are.
Peter.
I've got a couple of questions. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So a couple of alarm bells went off for me media-wise. One is it smacks of social engineering and gerrymandering, that a lot of people are going to see this as a way of addressing issues that have a political aspect to them. And you're trying to make us something. As you talk more about it, my fears are assuaged. But I worry that when you present this, you're going to get a lot of fear about that.
I think that's one of the realities of being a land use planner.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, these are deeply political and deeply personal issues.
Yeah.
Yep.
I look at the map and I say, why is Lolo not included in this? Why do you draw your lines where you drew them?
Yeah, and so I'll use that as an example. The best responses you can have is you had an objective criteria that you followed.
Right.
And in that sense, I wasn't concerned so much about Lolo not being included. I was concerned more about parts of Frenchtown being included. And the reason why we did not select Lolo is because it has a community council that has a recently adopted, well, relatively recently adopted area plan that has a land use map. They went through a very specific process to create that. I think we'll treat them differently when we go out to update their land use map, because we're going to have to work specifically with that community council and their land use map. Where in Frenchtown, they don't have anything, and they don't really want a ton of planning. And but we really needed to capture the Smurfit Mill site, because that is clearly a place that's going to develop and have significant regional impact when it does. It needed to be a part of this process. So yeah, at least, you know, the best you can do in those situations is have an objective answer. And it's usually, you know, it's in the boundary, it's as objective that we could come using the documents we have, but you try to put faith in the actual public process to get people involved, so they have the voice that influences the outcomes. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge all the time in planning.
Yeah. No, I applaud you for having the courage to do this. I worry, though, that you've pushed this large rock over the edge, and it's going to get out of control quickly. And I'm delighted to go to some of these and hear what people say.
Yeah, well, it's possible.
Yeah,
I mean, you never know.
Right.
I've had projects work out very successfully and projects fail. I mean, it's a reality of being a planner, land use planner in Montana. It's tough work.
Yeah, sorry,
Not
I don't
for the
mean to
timid or
say.
weak.
I'm not suggesting that you're in over your head.
We fully recognize that. You know, we facilitate a process. We are not in control of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think I like the idea of cutting it into manageable pieces. You said a line I liked, which is, we like success. And so when you cut it into pieces that you know, you're not going to get the same sort of comments for the meetings on that list and the people who are in the areas that are affected by this particular, you know, segment of the mapping, the larger mapping project, you would if you were up in Condon. And when you try and like lump everybody together in one mega process, that's what you're going to get the sorts of comments that you're fearing. But I think by like sort of limiting it to the donut, as you know, as it is basically, I mean, I think you're more likely to get people who are on the same page, maybe.
We have the folks that live in this area have the values, we have values in common in this area that are different than other parts of the county. And right now, what I see, and this is my opinion from what I've done so far, but it could change, the values that we have in common that we need to recognize in this land use map that are going to be the most challenging to address are affordable housing and agricultural land. And so we have a pretty good grasp of what the issues are going to be that we're going to have to navigate. And we can at least identify the people that have the biggest stake in that. And those are our stakeholders. You know, those are the people we're going to sit down with one-on-one and try to talk and hear them out. And hopefully in a process like this, you know, we know we're not going to make everybody happy. There's no way. But at least if we can make everyone reasonably irritated enough that they don't show up and try to tank the project when it gets in front of you guys and the county commissioners, then we've probably been successful. Reasonably irritated enough is our benchmark.
Stephanie.
So thanks. I find this really fascinating, and I appreciate your sort of background as a member of the board. And in thinking about the outreach that you guys are doing, it seems like there's, in this first round, there's the public workshops, and then there's you're identifying stakeholders. And you might have already thought about this, but I encourage you, identifying the fact that we acknowledge that not everybody makes it to the public meetings. I was sort of thinking through who are the people who are going to have barriers to get to those. Like, I teach a lot of kids at Hellgate Elementary, and I can tell you the kids whose family members will be at that meeting and the kids whose family members are working a job in the evening and aren't going to be able to make it. And so considering including the people who will have barriers to get to those meetings as a key stakeholder too, because their voices really, even though they can't be represented in the public meetings, sometimes are important to involve in that. So.
And that's a really good point. I appreciate it. we have thought about that. I mean, that's obviously something we as planners think about all the time, how to reach out to the widest audiences we can. And our main strategy for trying to address people who can't or won't come to a public meeting is to have this online participation tool. And we're going to weigh that very, very seriously. It's called Social Pinpoint. It's really neat and it's powerful. So, for us, it's about diversifying the outreach, the opportunities to participate. So not just having public meetings, but having public meetings and the online participation tool that people can do at any point in time that, that fits their schedule. And, there's a limit to our capacity and what we can do, and we've evaluated that, and this is kind of our best strategy that we could piece together, Yeah.
Vince.
So I have a recommendation. It's nice to see a section on transportation in here. I work for Mountain Line. I've worked as a transportation planner in my whole career. One thing I noticed as well that Lolo wasn't included in the planning area. The reason I noticed it was because the MPO included Lolo in their, what they call their planning area for the Metropolitan Planning Organization. They've gone through a similar process every 10 years after the census updates. After each census, the census sends out an urbanized area for all urbanized areas and asks MPOs to establish a boundary within which they think will become urbanized in the next 20 years. And so I actually didn't see any mention of the transportation plan in this. I would recommend that. I think it's an important consideration when trying to determine where growth may or may not make sense for the future. One of the things that plan does, the main thing that the Activate Missoula Transportation Plan does is plan out the region's transportation spending for the next 30 or 40 years. So if we're planning growth or industry in areas that aren't served by projects that already exist now or are in that plan, we're going to have problems.
Yeah.
So I would recommend that.
Yeah, so the transportation plan it's probably just not in the spot you were looking for it. We do recognize it in the document under issue plans somewhere.
I was just looking at the list of plans at the very end.
Yeah, Well, I'll double, it's supposed to be in here, I'll double check.
And the boundary issue, I understand you probably have slightly different goals with establishing the boundary, but when you have two regional plans looking at growth in a similar time horizon, to have really different boundaries there might be benefits to making them more similar.
They're mostly the same. It comes down to the different objectives and different considerations. And it really comes down to that low area plan is why we couldn't really bring that in. There it is. It's on page 40, 2017 Activate Missoula. And we do have, Vince, just so you're aware, we do have our technical committee and we have representation from the MPO that is participating in this process. So we chat with them quite a bit.
I saw that. I figured he would get these comments or they'd be filtered through Aaron or Jessica.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Other comments? Jason.
I had noticed the Frenchtown kind of being excluded, and then you mentioned that it was one of the ones you guys targeted. And then I also don't see any kind of like mapping for the school districts, and you come awfully close to Frenchtown, and I kind of wonder and worry a little bit about like how these planning areas will affect a Frenchtown school district, and then meanwhile they're not being included as a comment kind of area. I just sort of think it's a little bizarre because we've had a few projects in Frenchtown over the years, and it certainly seems like laying down the dust and figuring out what they want to do would be a good thing. We've got commercial developments there, we've got residential developments there, and yet they're now kind of being left out of the mix.
Yeah.
And so what's up with that?
Yeah, so we think that the Frenchtown West Valley and the Community Council, so that area their issues are really a different separate, different than the Missoula urban areas. If we went out there and started talking about sewer extension and annexation, we would lose them. It would be done. So we don't, why we're including the West Valley Community Council, which represents that area in this project. In fact, I asked to go speak to them tomorrow night, but they'd rather have me on their agenda in April. So I'm going out there then to talk to them. So we will be engaging them in the process, but we didn't include most of that area for those significant differences in the issues that we're facing. And as for the school district boundaries, I mean, that's just a tough one to work around because that's a separate government body than Missoula County, according to state law. And, you know, the growth isn't really paying attention to school district boundaries. So does that make sense? Did I answer your question? I know it was.
Well, it's just that in general, if you're affecting their school district, yet their community isn't being engaged, it doesn't seem quite appropriate.
Yeah, so I will go out there and engage their community council. And someone suggested in the office the other day that maybe the best avenue to reach people in Frenchtown would be their school district. So we'll look into that.
And the other thing is your report adequately addresses the fact that in the county, you know, you have issues with water rights. I caught that just by flipping through, and I'm not passionate about the Frenchtown area, don't get me wrong. I just happen to know a few things about out there. They're one of the only irrigation districts in the area that have actually converted their water rights that are in their, you know, because they're not really owned by the individuals, they're a district.
Yeah.
And they've actually taken and converted theirs to water marketing, so you could actually potentially facilitate growth with their water right infrastructure that they have. Now, you might be catching the part of it with the northern little chunk of your red on the map, but in other words, you've identified a problem and you've got an area that actually found a solution for it, and we may not be able to take advantage of it. And we certainly can. We can still do things outside the red. We're not saying we're not going to.
Yeah.
It won't just have the same kind of planning teeth to it that you have in the other areas. So I guess that's just kind of a concern of mine is, you know, we identify problems, we should try to find the solutions that exist, and that's one
Can they
area.
transfer those water rights outside their district, you know?
Well, potentially you could use them for mitigation, but generally, you know, no, they've got, you know, an area to store them so they can, because they're irrigation water rights, so you have to store them and then, you know, release them during the winter. And so you have to have them fairly close in area to be appropriate. There's some transmission of that, but the other thing is I don't know if you can really credit, you know, they pay their taxes as a district, and I don't know if you can technically spend that
on somebody that's not
benefit on
taxed.
somebody else's non-taxable district. You know, I think you have to be in the Frenchtown or whichever irrigation district it was. I don't even know all the facts on who it was that did it, but I'm pretty sure it was not Frenchtown. It was the one just to the north of them that did it. So Carl Saunders would be able to give you more information on it.
Other questions?
I'll just echo the concern about school district boundaries too. I think that's a worthwhile piece of information to include in here. I think it reflects people's values, and also I was just thinking during the zoning request that we were considering earlier, we just assumed that there were schools nearby because it's an urban area, but I mean, it's hard to get your kids into kindergarten at Paxton or at Lewis and Clark right now. So, you know, I think it's worthwhile for people who are wanting to buy houses in these areas, who are wanting to grow in them, to have that information just at their fingertips. And this is such a good profile of so much information. It would be, I think, behoove this report to include that kind of stuff in it.
Really good points, and I'll see if I can get it in there real quick tomorrow morning before I send it off to the press. So I'll try. Yeah, but I think if people care a lot about their school districts, and it will come up. I mean, if two of you pointed out today, it will come up. So I'll see if I can get ahead of it and how much editing of this will require.
Other questions or comments? Okay.
Thank you.
Andrew, thank you.
Really good questions. Thank
Appreciate
you very
it.
much.
Okay, committee reports.
I have no report. I went to one meeting. They've got a new transportation plan, and all the people there, except for me, were getting paid to be there, so they're professionals. And so there's a lot of, and really, they have a certain amount of money, so they're trying to figure out what to spend it on. So I'll have a more complete report for you next time.
Okay,
When
sounds good.
An old hand.
Gotcha. Old business? Do we have any old business or new business and referrals? Any comments from planning board members? Jamie?
Did we, I volunteered myself to get on the housing committee that's chaired by Aaron Pean, and Mike Evans is there with other staff as well too. And Mike brought up at the end of the last meeting the fact that he had received a recommendation from this board with regard to perhaps recommending to them, if I can summarize this accurately, what we sent them, which was that, why don't you guys think about acting proactively to identify areas to be rezoned? It was, his response was significantly underwhelming. Has this board, have you or this board received any communication from the planning office with regard to our suggestion to them?
No,
Yeah.
not at this time. I mean, we're probably going to have to pursue it, to be
Yeah.
honest with you, which is fine,
And it's kind of not surprising, he doesn't want more on his plate.
Yeah. I think what what needs to happen is we need to go to an LUP meeting and start getting in people's faces in a kind, gentle way. But, being present, I think.
don't know how to do it kindly.
And that's on the, so planning board comments, that's on the city level, and on the county level. In the past, I was talking to one of the county commissioners about kind of one of the reasons I kind of re-upped my go at another 2 years. And I said, in the past, a lot of planning board would send a message. They'd even say, I'm voting no, to send a message to the county commissioners. And that's one of the reasons I got involved. And we haven't been doing that, and I really like that. And she said, well, I'm surprised by that because we weren't getting that message. They didn't get that that's why people were voting no, because whatever. And she said, there's nothing to say that you guys can't invite us to come have a chat, or we couldn't have a forum. So I guess I just wanted to see on a leadership level if we wanted to try to reach out either just as city council members or to county commissioners to see if there's a way. Now I know that they have to be careful about quorums and whether they notice it as a hearing, but I don't know if that's ever been done. And so it'd be one of those things to kind of have a roundtable discussion perhaps with either a representative of them, and just to see if there's a flavor for that, because I think they were a little bit surprised to hear that maybe some of that stuff was happening, and maybe we could create a better environment for going both directions, in the future. So,
I mean, it wouldn't be that difficult to, I guess I'm kind of guessing on this in some ways, but I mean, would it be that difficult to notice a public hearing that the Board of County Commissioners were going to be present at one of our meetings? I mean, to the extent they're willing to come, hopefully they would be.
Yeah. And I don't know if we have enough concerns to warrant that. That's
true.
Before we say we want to request them, I guess that's one question is, do we really have anything we want to talk to them about? Or would it, would there be benefits regardless, just to kind of get a flavor for what they think and what's going on? And, I know there was the whole thing that before I got on the board about the ag rules going through and planning board recommending approval and then not getting approved. And for my entire first term, I heard bitterness about that for 2 years. So,
Absolutely.
And so is there maybe even something worth rehashing on that and talking to them about what their goals are for it so that people don't spend their emotion, I don't know what it is, but their soul on something that just gets denied. Yeah, and I think there's maybe other solutions that could be discussed. And so I'm just kind of curious that, we certainly, our planning staff are our avenue to them at this point. That's kind of been the conduit for years, but maybe there should be some sort of annual check-in that is a conversation just about what's important to both sides.
Mm-hmm.
For them to also say, hey, we appreciate you guys setting down a legal precedent when we're having to review a subdivision too. For them to explain why it's important for us to stick to the facts and not send a message via some weird vote that says, I'm voting no because they didn't rezone their property. I mean, I saw one like that one time. You're in an unzoned area in the county and they say, well, this should be zoned. Well, we don't have to. Well, then I'm voting no. Well, that's not what the rules say you can do, but I don't care. That's what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't you talk to the county commissioners to set policy that says you should zone before you bring in a subdivision within so many miles of the city? Why not do it kind of more in a mature way, I guess, is not to slam any past planning board members, but that's just kind of my opinion on it.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Yeah. And you were probably here for some of those planning board meetings where that was said, so.
Absolutely.
And that hasn't happened for a while, so I really am proud of our planning board for not doing that, but I think keeping up the good spirit of it to where we're actually providing the county the service that we're supposed to be doing, which is helping them stay legally defensible while providing meaningful feedback as well.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, for sure.
So anyway, I just wanted to kind of bridge that gap since I've had that conversation with the commissioner, and, you know, I'm sure that some city councilors would appreciate that opportunity as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I know, I mean, really, I think probably the easiest way to do it with the city council is to go to an LUP meeting, but unfortunately then we don't have the whole board there, and we're like sending liaisons, or a group, you know, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's something to think about, and then just decide if we have enough issues that are worth talking about to warrant an invitation or not.
Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll adjourn. Thanks, everybody.